Your Majesty, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor to be here to speak to all of you today. I'm also grateful to my good friend and guru, Professor Victor Halberstadt, for recommending that I accept this invitation. The only problem is that I'm not sure how to start when I speak in Europe, because in America you begin with a joke, in Asia you begin with an apology. So maybe what I'll do is I'll combine the two traditions and I'll apologize for my bad joke. But my bad joke actually is a true story. Many years ago, when I was the permanent secretary of the Foreign Ministry in Singapore, one of my counterparts went to China. He called on his counterpart, a vice minister. He arrived at the vice minister's office and introduced himself and said, "I'm Mr. Tan, I'm the permanent secretary of this ministry from Singapore." And there was a young Chinese lady translator. She scratched her head, and finally said in Chinese, she said, "Well, this guy says he's Mr. Tan, and he says that he's the eternal typist from Singapore." So permanent secretary became eternal typist. But so why do I begin with that story? I begin because if you can have cultural misunderstanding between China, which is 100% Chinese, and Singapore, which is 75% Chinese, you realize that we have a big problem creating global understanding. And frankly, in response to your theme today, is everything under control? My answer to you is, watch out. If you don't understand the enormous challenges that the world is experiencing now, then I'm afraid things may actually spin under control. So what I plan to do first is to describe to you why I think the world today is facing challenges of a scale that we have never experienced before in human history. And if I had to describe the challenges in fairly simple terms, I say that you'll face challenges on what I call a vertical axis and a horizontal axis. And both of these challenges on the vertical and horizontal axis are major challenges in their own right. Combined together, of course, they create a phenomenal challenge for the world. So what's the challenge on the vertical axis? The challenge on the vertical axis is that we are seeing today the greatest shifts of power ever seen in human history. And that's why we are entering a completely new era of world history. And how do I characterize this new era of world history? I characterize it with 2 points. Firstly, what I say, we're seeing the end of the era of Western domination of world history. But I hasten to add that the end of the era of Western domination of world history is not the end of the West. The West remains the single strongest civilization for a long time to come. But it will not be the only successful civilization. There'll be other successful civilizations. And the second point related to this, of course, you're going to see the return of Asia. And why do I call it the return of Asia? Quite simply because from the year 1 to the year 1820, the two largest economies in the world were number 1, China, number 2, India. So by 2050, when, as Goldman Sachs predicts, that the 4 largest economies in the world will be number 1, China, number 2, India, number 3, United States of America, number 4, Japan, that's a return to the historical norm. And of course, a return to the norm is easier to accomplish. So, but at the same time, we do know one of the biggest lessons of history is that when you have these great shifts of power, it's very difficult to manage them. And what makes it even more difficult to manage is that the pace of change today is much faster than we've ever experienced in human history. Now, even I didn't realize how fast things were changing until after I finished writing the book. And after I finished writing the book, I sent to my friends to get endorsements, and I sent to Larry Summers, the former Treasury Secretary, former president of Harvard, now chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, and I said, Larry, can you give me an endorsement? He did. He gave me a wonderful endorsement. But in addition, he gave me a paragraph that was so powerful that I had to put it in the book. And what did that paragraph say? It said that what's happening today in Asia is a replication of what the West experienced in the Industrial Revolution. And when the Western Industrial Revolution, you saw a significant improvement in living standards, but you saw a significant improvement in living standards of 50% in one lifetime. But in Asia, you're seeing today an improvement in living standards in one lifetime, not of 50%, not 100%, not 200%, but 10,000%. Believe me, we have never before seen this in human history. So if you get confused by the pace of change, you should be confused, because you've never experienced this before. And then, on the horizontal axis, you're seeing another dramatic transformation of the world, because the world is shrinking. Now, how do I describe the impact of this shrinkage? I use a very simple analogy. Before modern globalization came along, when you lived in 192 countries, it was like living in 192 separate boats. And so all you needed was rules of the multilateral order to make sure that the boats didn't collide. But with the shrinkage of the world, all 6.8 billion people in the world no longer live in 192 boats. They live in 192 cabins on the same boat. The only problem is they're living in 192 cabins on the same boat with no captain or crew to take care of the boat as a whole. And this varies, and I wish this analogy was an abstract one, but it is sadly a literal description of why the world is spinning out of control, because we're sailing on a boat without a captain or crew to take care of the boat. And if you want proof that this is how the world operates, look at all the big challenges that we face today. Let me just quickly mention 4, right? There was a mention earlier in the introduction about the financial crisis that we are facing today, right? It began in the United States of America, subprime mortgages, and boom, before you knew it, the whole world was caught in the biggest recession in 70 years. And it came and spread across the whole boat. And if you sat in your cabin, you couldn't take care of the crisis because it spread through the whole boat. And you take another example, also this year. Take pandemics, right? Take the H1N1. It began in Mexico, spread through the whole boat. No matter which cabin you're in, the pandemic will find you, right? Take global terrorism, right? When I was in Manhattan, when the 2 World Trade Center towers came down, why did they come down? A few men sitting in a village in Afghanistan plotted and planned and brought the World Trade Center towers down. And if you take today, probably the biggest challenge we face today, climate change, global warming, right? No country can solve this problem on its own. Not even the United States, not China, not anybody. The world has to come together. So clearly, in our world today, what we need is global leadership that will take care of the boat as a whole. The question is, are we going to get it? And if you're going to get it, then the answer is, hey, things are under control. But if you're not going to get it, then maybe things may spin out of control. And now let me come to the bad news. The bad news is that there'll be at least 3 reasons why it'll be very difficult for the world to get global leadership. And here let me add that I'm going to say things which are of course slightly controversial. I may make you feel uncomfortable, but I think feeling discomfort is a very important part of understanding the world that is coming, because the world that is coming is not one that we can understand if we sit in our comfort zones. We have to step outside our comfort zones to understand a completely different world that is emerging. And that explains why these 3 reasons are very important to understand. The first reason why it's difficult to get global leadership today is that our entire international order, a 21st century international order, rests on 19th century premises, which is, it rests on an international order of nation states. And that was how international order was first created. And leaders at governments were programmed to take care of their nation states and not to take care of the world. And as long as the leaders are programmed to do that, you will have a problem. Now let me give a good example. Now when you ask anyone today, hey, mention the greatest world leader you know, the first answer that comes out, of course, is Obama. Now Obama is a great man. He has the right instincts. He wants to do good for the world. But can he do it? Let me just give you 2 examples. We're going to meet in Copenhagen, right? To address the climate change challenge. And surely, if leadership is going to come, it has to come from the United States, right? The world's greatest polluter for so long. But in the United States, you can propose a very simple solution to reduce emissions. Just propose $1 a gallon tax. That's all. And the price of gas will still be lower than in Europe. And that will reduce gas consumption, reduce the fiscal deficit, provide money for clean technology. It will do wonders. But not one American politician dares to suggest $1 a gallon tax because it's politically suicidal. And even the toothless Waxman-Markey bill that asks for no sacrifice up front cannot be passed. And that's an indication of why we are stuck in that order. And here, if I may make another provocative point, let me emphasize that, of course, having democracies is a good thing. We don't want to live in a world of dictatorships. But let us also be aware that when you have democratic systems and you have politicians who are programmed to meet the short-term needs of the electorate, it means that they are programmed to take care of the cabin and are therefore not programmed to take care of the world as a whole. So having democracies in small cabins creates national pools of selfishness, and that's a very difficult thing to change. And that's why it's so hard to get global leadership. Now, what's the second reason why it's hard to get global leadership? The second reason is that the most natural leaders to, in a sense, transform the international order should come from the West, which still remains the strongest civilization, as I mentioned earlier. And in many ways, the 1945 liberal international order that has brought so much good to the world has been the most benign international order ever created in human history, was a gift from the West to the world. And so logically, if you're looking for a candidate to provide that kind of global leadership, the West should provide it. But frankly, the West is unlikely to provide it. And here, this is another provocative point. Because the populations in the West, including the United States and Europe, who were at one stage open to liberalizing the world order, believe in open and free trade, are now frightened of free trade. And that's why, take the United States for example, it has negotiated FTAs with Korea, it has negotiated FTAs with Colombia, both of which will benefit the United States of America, but the US Congress will not pass them. And for example, if you want to do one small, simple thing to improve the world today, it can be done tomorrow, immediately. Complete the Doha round. But it cannot be done. Because in the United States, the agricultural lobby will block it. And in Europe, the agricultural lobby will block it. So the interests of a few farmers will block the world from achieving the completion of the Doha round, which could make the world a better place. And if you have populations that are focused on short-term interests and not on the larger global interests, you will never get the kind of global leadership that we need to fix the world. So the third reason why it'll be difficult to get global leadership is that you might want to say, hey, why not the new leaders of the world, the new emerging countries? Why not China? Why not India provide global leadership, right? Perhaps they can, perhaps they shouldn't. But the simple answer is they're not ready. And they're not ready for very complex political, geopolitical, economic reasons, which I cannot, of course, explain the complexity in a minute or so. But in the case of China, they have so many domestic pressing challenges. The Chinese leadership doesn't want to take global leadership. And at the same time, for geopolitical reasons, to avoid alarming the United States of America, China will keep a low profile and not aspire for global leadership. And similarly, India will also is not ready. Too many domestic challenges. So you can see, therefore, for all these reasons, at a time when we need global leadership, it's not going to come. So therefore, should I leave you feeling pessimistic? Now let me end on an optimistic note. I actually believe, and this may surprise you, that we are heading towards a better world. And why are we heading towards a better world? Simple. If you look at the population of the world as a whole, there's 6.8 billion people in the world. The number of people whose lives are being improved every day has never been greater. You're seeing the emergence of middle classes on a scale that has never been seen before in human history. You are seeing in Asia, for example, for every 10% increase in median income, you're seeing a doubling of the middle class, say from 200 million to 400 million. And that's a massive transformation of the fabric of human society. And so I actually believe that with the rise of Asia, the emergence of new middle classes, the emergence of what I call more responsible stakeholders, you will see at the end of the day, despite all the challenges that I've mentioned, a better world emerging. And if you want to get a glimpse of this better world that is emerging, I'm just going to end with one final remark, which may seem to you like a commercial, but it's an accurate description of what you can see. If you want to have a glimpse of the future, you should encourage young Dutch people to come and study at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy in Singapore, because there you will find the future leaders of Asia, and you begin to understand why there is so much optimism in the world today. Thank you very much.